Okay, so in this video we're going to be talking about the star life cycle. So these are the different stages that a star will go through from formation to collapses. Too simple a word, but yeah, from its formation until the end of its life. So here is the diagram that we've been given by the exam board. So we've got all these different stages, and you need to be able to label all of these stages, know the names, put them in the right order, and know that if a star is about the same size as our sun or smaller, it follows this sequence, and if the star is much bigger than our sun, it follows this sequence. And then at this point after the supernova, if it's absolutely enormous, it will form a black hole, and if it's slightly smaller than that, it will form a neutron star. That's a bit dull because that's just words, so let's try and have some images to help us imagine all these different stages that a star is going through. So first of all, we've got our nebula, our cloud of dust and gas, and within that cloud of dust and gas, within that nebula, you will get protostars start to form. They look like little bright specks within a photo of this cloud of dust and gas. And then once that protostar has formed, it will either, depending on its size, become an average size main sequence star, then it will become a red giant, then planetary nebula will be formed, but we don't need to worry so much about that at GCSE, and a white dwarf will be left behind, and then that will cool down to form a black dwarf. Or, if it's bigger than the size of our sun, it will form a bigger main sequence star. After that, it will turn into a red supergiant. Then a supernova explosion will happen, and then depending on its size, it will turn into a neutron star, or if it's bigger, a black hole. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each of the stages of the star life cycle in detail. So you'll want to get your diagram of the star life cycle and make summary notes to it and add details in about what sort of fusion is taking place at different stages and what causes the change from one stage of the sequence to the next. So we're talking about the life cycle of a star, and in order to make a star, first of all we need a protostar. So this is a huge cloud of dust and gas in space, and the gravity between the atoms in the cloud pulls all the atoms together. That makes the cloud get smaller. That increases the pressure and temperature of the cloud, and if we can get that temperature and pressure large enough, we'll then have fusion starting to occur. But this only happens if the cloud is big enough. Once fusion has started in the protostar, it then becomes a main sequence star. In a main sequence star, the forces acting on the star are stable. So the two forces involved are gravity, which pulls the star in towards the centre, making it smaller, and then the force from the hot gas pushing outwards, and the gas keeps staying hot because of the energy released by the fusion. So if those forces are balanced, the star will stay the same size and temperature, and it is a main sequence star. In the main sequence star, fusion is occurring in the core, and it fuses hydrogen into helium. Now, depending on how big this main sequence star is, two different things will happen to it next in its life. If the star is about the same size as our sun, it will follow this part of the star life cycle. However, if the star is much bigger than our sun, as over here, it will follow this part of the star life cycle. So let's talk about the life cycle for a star the same size as our sun or smaller first of all. When the hydrogen has run out in the star, so all the hydrogen has been fused into helium and there's no hydrogen left, then changes happen in the star. That is because the type of fusion taking place in the star has changed. So we're now onto a red giant, and as the name would suggest, moving to this stage means that the star size has increased, so the star's got bigger. Okay, the outer surface of the star has got cooler because it's got bigger, and so it's become a red coloured star, which is a bit cooler than it was before. Now, in the red giant, fusion is still taking place, but it's fusion of large elements. So here we're fusing together small atoms to make anything up to oxygen in the periodic table. So we're not fusing hydrogen and hydrogen to form helium, we're fusing hydrogen and helium to form lithium, for example, or helium and helium to form bigger elements. So elements up to oxygen are formed by fusion in a red giant until all of the helium has been fused together and there is nothing left for fusion to take place on. When there is no material left in the red giant to fuse, it will change again into a white dwarf. So what happens here is that the core of the red giant, where fusion was taking place, is left behind, but no fusion takes place anymore, and so it's just white hot, and that is the white dwarf. The outer layers of gas that did exist around the red giant are dispersed into the universe, just leaving the white hot core, which is extremely hot and known as a white dwarf. Eventually, over time, this old core of the star will cool down, and as it cools down, it will eventually become a black dwarf that isn't hot. And so you're just left with the cold, old interior of a star. Again, no fusion is taking place in the white dwarf or the black dwarf. Now let's talk about what happens if the star is much bigger than our Sun. So it was a main sequence star where it was fusing hydrogen into helium, and when the hydrogen runs out it also changes, but this time it's going to change into a red supergiant. As the name suggests, this is even bigger than a red giant, but it's changed for the same reasons. The hydrogen that was in our main sequence star has run out, and so the size of the star changes. We now have fusion of larger elements again, but this time up to iron. So anything in the periodic table up to iron can be made inside a red supergiant by fusion. Again, the outer surface of the red supergiant is cooler because the star has increased in size, which has meant that it's changed colour to be red. Now, eventually, all of the helium will run out in the red supergiant for fusion, and at that point, the star will change again into a supernova. Now, a supernova is a massive explosion. It's very bright. You can see it all across the universe, and it releases a huge amount of energy. What's taking place when a supernova occurs is that the outer layers of the star collapse, and then they bounce off the core of the star and then rebound outwards as an explosion. So the elements that were fusing inside the core of the star are dispersed by the supernova so that they can go and form into other things like planets. Any element bigger than iron will be made in a supernova because it needs lots of energy for that fusion to occur. So there is some fusion taking place in a supernova, but it's only of elements bigger than iron because they need that extra energy. Now, depending on how big the star was, after the supernova, it can either turn into a neutron star, if it was a bit smaller, or a black hole if it was even bigger. And these are both quite interesting things. A neutron star is extremely dense, and what's happened is that the atom inside the star has collapsed, so the electron and the proton have turned into a neutron, so there's no space inside the atom anymore, so it's this ridiculously dense neutron star. If it's a black hole, because it's even bigger, there's even more gravity, and it gets so dense that even light can't escape it, and it then becomes a singularity known as a black hole. So there you have it, the star life cycle of a star, of a big star and a smaller star. You need to be able to label the different stages and describe what's happening for different questions. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the different exam style questions you could have, and you're going to have a go at answering them. So here's a couple of really important points that you need to have in your summary notes somewhere, and make sure that you're very clear about and ask questions if they don't make sense. So first of all, at the start of the star's life cycle, the dust and gas drawn together by gravity cause fusion reactions. So in those protostars that we saw, that's where we've got fusion reactions starting to take place. Next point, that has to be somewhere in your summary notes. A star goes through a life cycle. The life cycle is determined by the size of the star. So a star doesn't stay the same all the way through its life. And the cycle that it goes through is determined by its size. Third point, fusion processes in stars produce all of the naturally occurring elements. Elements heavier than iron are produced in a supernova. At the beginning of the universe, there was just hydrogen. Every other element that we have in the periodic table on Earth has been made in a star by fusion. Any element bigger than iron, because any element bigger than iron needs so much energy to fuse it together, was made in a supernova. And then finally, the explosion of a massive star, which we call a supernova, distributes those elements throughout the universe. Okay, so we know that we've got roughly 110 different elements on Earth, and they have been made in a star either through fusion or through a supernova and the fusion that happened there, and they've been distributed by a supernova. Now, one point I just want to go over again and make sure we're really clear about is that within a main sequence star, so we've got our main sequence stars here, fusion reactions lead to an equilibrium between the gravitational collapse of a star and the expansion of a star due to fusion energy. So that point we need in our notes somewhere, but we're going to explain what that means because it sounds a little crazy. So imagine you've got your star drawn by the red circle here. The star is made up of really, really, really hot gas, but all of the particles in the gas have got mass, and so they're attracted to one another by gravity. So that means that the star wants to collapse because of gravity. It wants to get smaller and become more dense. But because fusion is taking place in the star, fusion, we know from all of our work in nuclear physics, is releasing energy, and the energy is making the gas hot and giving the particles lots of energy to move around. And we know that when gases get hot, they expand. So we've got expansion due to the fusion energy released, but then we've also got gravity pulling the star inwards. And in a main sequence star, these two forces are balanced. So the collapse that wants to happen because of gravity is balanced out by the expansion due to the energy released from fusion. Now, as long as those two forces are balanced, the star is stable, it will stay the same size, and we say it is in the main sequence. If for some reason one of these forces changes, so maybe the energy released from fusion changes, then the forces won't be balanced, and we will move on to a different step of the life cycle. So if you want to check that you have got a good understanding of the different stages in the life cycle, try answering these questions. So first of all, describe how fusion starts in a star. Number 2, describe the life cycle of a star bigger than our sun. And number 3, describe the life cycle of a star the same size as our sun. Now, these questions in the exam are a really good example of why we have to bug the question, because they like asking you questions about different parts of the star life cycle, so you have to pay attention to which part you are being asked about.